I'm Joanne Lundy, and the Planning Committee joins me in welcoming you to the bucket courses on this very last day of September. We're happy to have you here, and Monique Shore, who is an indispensable member of the library staff, has an announcement to make for you this morning. And by the way, when you come in and you notice Monique is up here at the computer, you know we've got some technological challenges. But I'm happy to introduce to you Monique Shore.
Thanks, Joanne. You may have noticed on your chairs this morning a handout about an event next week that we're very excited about. Edith Renfro-Smith, who is a woman that you heard reference to if you attended Dan Kaiser's event. The Renfro family was a notable African-American family in Grinnell in the early 1900s. Edith is now 101 years old and lives in Chicago. She is alert and sharp and full of wonderful stories. And last month, through an arrangement having to do with the Poweshiek History Preservation Project and connections that Dan has and connections with the college, we were able to have someone go to Edith's house in Chicago and scan some pictures of her family, which was very exciting in and of itself because we didn't have any photos of her family, and the college did not have any photo of her historic graduation in 1937, when she was the first female black woman to graduate from the college. When those photos came back to us, as we were chatting, it came up that she and her daughter were planning to come and visit some friends in October here in Grinnell. So, because, you know, at 101, she still likes to come and visit. So, after we learned of that, we got to thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have her come and share some of her stories live with us? And so next Wednesday afternoon at 1:30 in the afternoon, we're going to set things up in this space, and Dan, who's done a lot of research on her family, Dan is going to sit down with her, and they're just going to share some stories, do a little Q&A if there are questions that members of the audience have. And we would love it if some of you would be able to join us. So, thank you.
Doesn't that sound like a terrific program? You'll be here, Monique. Thank you. I have bad news and good news for you this morning. We'll start with bad news first. I got a call yesterday saying that Dan is ill and is not able to be here to present his class today. Hurry on to the good news, which is that Byron Hueftle-Worley is going to be here to regale you with stories about old Grinnell. I think he's had, the better part of 23 hours to put this lecture together. And he may have wasted a couple of those hours sleeping, but we really appreciate him being here this morning. And so here we go with Byron Hueftle-Worley and stories about old Grinnell. Byron.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. Great. Okay, let me know if you can't hear me. And if at any point you have a question, please, please, please ask me that question, because I don't think I'm going to go the whole hour and a half today. I don't have quite enough material. Now, when Joanne asked me to do this, what I told her I was going to talk about was the peace rock of 1913 and the assorted sociological, societal, and economic things that led to its existence on the middle of the campus. But I thought about that more, and I thought, that sounds like a lot of work. So anybody who knows my wife Karen and me, you know we have a lot of cats. So I'm going to spend the next hour and a half showing you pictures of cats sitting on things. This is Simon in our soup pot. You wash it before you come over for dinner, the pot, not the cat. This is Crumpet, and yes, as a combat veteran, I have a cat named Crumpet. Deal with it. He's sleeping in a box. He's kind of looking at you. And this is Simon again in one of those Bulgatanga market baskets. Okay, all kidding aside for at least a moment. I just wanted to see the look on Joanne's face. I wanted to see if I could get her not to smile. Because this is the most gracious, kind woman I know. She has built this course. She produces it every time you have it. Everybody gets applause who does all the other work. And there are a lot of people involved in this, a lot of people. But then there's Joanne. She reminds me of a duck on a pond. Have you ever watched a duck? They're just kind of serene. They always look happy. But if you peer down in the water, underneath the water, they go like this. But they're happy and serene, and that's Joanne. And I know a lot of people have gotten applause here, but I really think it is a great favor if we could give her one great applause. It was a little bit of a surprise and maybe a bit of a shock to get a call yesterday morning asking if I could be here. But think how it feels to have to make that phone call and have the good grace to get people to say, yes, Joanne, I'll do anything for you. So, okay, you don't want to talk about this is why Facebook exists, so I don't really need to handle that. Oh, we already heard it for Joanne. Sorry, I already had a slide made for that. The Peace Rock of 1913. Yes, this is going to be more than you ever wanted to know. I'm going to try to talk for the next hour and a half, minus the break, about a rock. Most of you don't know that there is a very large granite boulder buried in the middle of Grinnell College campus. Only a very small hand of people have ever seen it who are still alive. I'm one of them, and I knew what it was when I looked at it because I spent an afternoon trying to find this thing. So what I want to give you is the overall story of why there is a rock that's been buried on campus for 102 years that nobody has seen that we might dig up next spring. Okay? So with that teaser, there are a lot of different institutions and traditions we have in schools. For those of you who know who Grinnell College is, I think most of you do, they have what's called the titular head. It's a big party every spring, I think it is. It's been going since, the late 1960s. So anybody who is going to college at Grinnell now, that is an institution, that is a tradition that has gone on there since before they were born. And things that have gone on since before we were born, we tend to think have always been going on. And we also extend that and think they always will go on. Well, this is a tradition that existed from somewhere in the 1880s up until at least 1927. It was an annual event held on the campus that was covered in the newspapers and brought great acclaim and also great scorn upon the institution of Grinnell College. And this all does tie back around to the rocks, so just be patient with me. It's called the class scrap. Every year, the freshman boys and the sophomore boys would meet, and they would have what in effect was a capture the flag game, but was actually a giant wrestling match. Now sometimes, especially in the late teens and into the 20s, this took on a fairly formalized, let's go meet on the football field, the guys would get together, everybody else would stand around, they'd wrestle. Whoever could tie up all the members of the other class won the contest. But in earlier days, it was much more of a free-ranging kind of warfare that could go on for several days or even several weeks. The standard pattern was the two groups would camp in different places trying not to get caught. They would send skirmishers out through town, getting a lot of trouble for chewing up people's vegetable gardens and that kind of thing. And then eventually, they would all meet for one big melee. And as we'll see as I talk about this a little bit, quite often that worked out quite well. It was good entertainment for people, and it was always covered in the newspaper as though it were a sporting event. Other times it didn't work out so well, and we'll get to that after having a little bit of water. Okay, this is out of the yearbook. This is 1916. You really can't see the pictures very clearly, but I'm going to go into them in a little detail. But just to give you an idea, notice the crossed and tied hands and the rope. Nowadays, we would consider this perhaps a little non-PC, non-politically correct. What we have here are the sophomore boys, looking nice, they're neat and tidy, they make a cohesive mass. They have come together as a class, they've been together for over a year, they know each other, they're fairly cohesive, obviously good-looking group. The freshmen, not so much. They've only been at the school for a few weeks, they don't really know each other, they have not coalesced as a class. They're all kind of standing there looking, trying to look tough, trying to look whatever, but you'll notice there are a lot more of them, because just like school today, the freshman class tends to weed out some of the students, so there are always fewer students in the sophomore class. And that makes an interesting arrangement, because if you're having a fight, you have a smaller, more cohesive group, but a much larger, less cohesive group. How is that going to work out?
What buildings?
This is Carnegie Hall, or Carnegie Library in the back here. And this is just before ARH would have been built. This is, I think, a couple of years before Alumni Wrestle. Okay? So this is on Central Campus. Yes, and please stop with any questions. Stop and ask any questions. Here's the actual fight from that year. This is one of two pictures. I apologize, these are pictures that were probably taken with a Brownie camera, printed in a low-cost book, and then copied yesterday afternoon by lamplight in the archives. So I had to lay off my photoshopping team and my production crew due to the, anyway. So you can see, we have young men here wrestling in the foreground, and primarily women standing around watching the fray. And they're right up next to it. This is a fairly formalized event. There's a ring of spectators, and they're watching young men wrestle and tie each other up. Do you think we'd get away with this in today's modern society? I don't think so. There was a lot of social activity to this. This is 1907, I believe. These are the freshmen camped out at the baseball diamond down south of town. And they have a bonfire, they're looking cool, they get their picture taken, and they're going to be skirmishing all night with the sophomore boys. So there's a lot of camaraderie building, a lot of teamwork building, and at least there was the concept that they were coalescing as a class. You do notice that there are no women doing any of this. I mean, we're still half a dozen years or more before women even got the chance to vote. So when we're talking about coalescing as a class, we're obviously talking about just the males. The women get to watch, I guess. This is another evening picture. You can't see it terribly clearly, but they have an effigy here. And if you read it, they're actually going to bury an effigy intended to mean the sophomore class. And they buried this effigy on Central Campus. The president of the college took some exception to that and really gave them a hard time the next day at Daily Chapel. Remember when we had Daily Chapel? I don't either. But they had Daily Chapel, and they got a really hard time from the president for it. But this was just part of the procedure for baiting the other class. This is from 1903. It's just an interesting picture, and I'm going to get to talking about some of these scraps. But think about this individual. Raoul was a freshman who did not participate in the scrap and was apparently hiding out in one of the pews, in Steiner Hall. Now, it's okay not to participate in what's going to be a big fight the next day, or that day, but can you imagine, here we are 112 years later, the main thing that I know about young Mr. Raoul is that he wimped out and didn't participate in this class scrap. Again, I don't think we probably put up with that in our modern, more genteel society, and I don't think we want to. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me talk about a few of the class scraps, just to give you an idea of some of the fun that they had. 1906, the sophomores organized very early on. They camped out, and then in the middle of the night, they went to the rooms of as many of the freshmen as they could find. This is in the days before residence halls and all of that, so everybody was living with individual families. They went to the houses where there was also a sophomore living who would let them in, and they captured the freshman boys out of their beds, tied them up, and then put them on the back of a hay rack with a couple of horses and took them to a farm half a dozen miles east of town. Kept them there overnight, and then in the morning, in order to get back to classes and morning chapel, I will remind you, the sophomores took the wagon back in and went about their business, leaving the freshmen tied up out in the countryside in an area they didn't know. So by the time they could get untied and wend their way back to town, it was half the day past, and they were in tremendous trouble because they were responsible for being late, not the sophomores who actually made them. I don't think that's quite as fair an arrangement, but that's how the system worked at the time. So that's 1906. In 1907 is when we get to the Rand Gymnasium. This is one of the great places. This was a gymnasium down about where what used to be called the Forum, now it's IT or something like that, okay? If you know where the Forum is, that's where the Rand Gymnasium is. I'll have a map here in a few minutes if you really care, okay? During the night, the two groups camped out in their separate areas, but during the day, the sophomores were getting the better of the freshmen in their melee. So the freshmen, a number of them, took off, got into the gymnasium, which was then the women's gymnasium. The men's gymnasium having been built, we'll see a picture of it, a bit after this. And then when Darby was built, that became the men's. Notice how the men get the new gym, and the women always get the cast-off gym. Now we have the PEC, now we have the new center out here, and everybody gets the same treatment, I think. So Title IX is a good thing. Anyway, back to the Rand Gymnasium. I get off on tangents. I've got a couple of doozies coming up here. The Rand Gymnasium, they got inside and blocked the doors, thinking they'd be safe. The sophomores, being smart cookies, got pry bars and pried up the stone steps, blocked them up against the doors of the building so the freshmen couldn't get out. The freshmen, not to be outdone, went around, you can't see the picture here, they broke out the window in the director's office, climbed out, and then went back to the fight. Needless to say again, the spoilsport college administration took a dim view of this. And there were some calls to actually do away with the class scrap, because it was considered to be rather rude to be tearing up college property, hurting people, in some cases breaking arms and things in a fight like this. But as we'll see, it was a very tenacious, very popular tradition that just kept on going. 1908, there was no class scrap. The sophomores were outnumbered more than 2 to 1, and they had the wise realization that even though they were more cohesive, they were going to lose, so they just didn't bother to fight. Also, the football coach, now here we're getting a little bit more modern, the football coach forbade the sophomore boys from participating in the class scrap because he thought it was not a manly thing to do. Now that took a dozen or so of the prime young men out of the sophomore class. It didn't affect the freshman class because freshmen were not eligible to participate in sports at the time. So the sophomores, being wise, basically hid out overnight and they hid out the next day, didn't show up, and it was basically canceled because, well, nobody wanted to fight. The freshmen declared a victory until the next year when they were sophomores. In 1909, the scrap was limited in a number of very fundamental ways. This is still a reaction from the Rand Gymnasium problem and the inequality. Number one, the hours were limited between 10 p.m. Monday to 7 a.m. Tuesday. So there were only limited hours that they could participate, and a certain number of each class were chosen by their class so that the two groups would have the same number of people, and they had a very gentlemanly, apparently Marquis of Queensberry rules wrestling match until one class won, and it happened to be the sophomores in that case. So that They were trying to make this thing into something of a socially beneficial experience rather than just basically a fight. 1911 was my favorite class scrap, and I'm going to click onto that. In 1911, the freshman boys, in order to get away from the sophomores, camped out in a barn a couple of miles due west of town. They got into the barn, they didn't think they told anybody where they were going to be, and they camped down to spend the night. This is out of their yearbook. So this theoretically shows them sleeping before the evening. I think it's probably a posed picture, but who can say? The sophomores got somebody to tell them, got somebody to rap where the freshmen were, and they got out there, surrounded the barn, and blocked all the doors, and demanded that the freshmen come out and fight. The freshmen, seeing that they were outnumbered because it wasn't the entire class in there, refused to come out and fight. So the sophomores had a guy go back to campus, go to the science building, and steal a jar of bromine. Now, bromine is a fairly nasty chemical. It gives you symptoms, exposure to it gives you symptoms of acute seasickness. It's a liver toxin, and it's also acidic, so it will burn the skin. So what they did was, this young man went back, and while they kept the freshmen in the barn, they opened the jar and simply threw it in a window. Everyone in the building became, as the newspaper reported, deathly sick. One fellow was burned badly and blistered on his arms and his back, where the material actually hit him, and most of them were on the verge of passing out by the time they were dragged out of the building. This is, again from the yearbook, this is after the fight. This is another view of the barn. And here is what appears to be an original picture of a young man on the ground being tied up and others trying to get into the barn for whatever reason they have. So this is where this class scrap has gotten way out of hand. Damaging property is bad enough, but actually hurting people and poisoning them really got some attention. This got real adverse reaction in the community. Now, just as a quick aside, years ago on eBay, since I watch for Grinnell things, I found a postcard that said, mailed in Grinnell, and it was mailed in Grinnell, and it said something about where glass scrap was kept. And the owner of the postcard who was selling it said, I don't know why they kept glass scrap in the barn, but that's what it says. And I got it for $10, I think. So it says glass scrap 1914 on the top, and at the bottom it says bromine important factor here. I just love that. This is a boastful picture taken by one student and sent to a friend in Grinnell boasting about bromine. He apparently thought it was okay to do that. Now think, when you think about this barn, we're used to old barns littering the countryside. And I say littering because we don't use them the way they were used in the old days. A barn was the factory of the farm. It was the center. If you came out here homesteading, you build a barn before you build a house. You live in a tent if that was how you get your barn built. But in 1914, look at this barn. If that was a working barn, they have trashed it. They've kicked out boards. They've done incredible damage to it. Oh, it's fascinating. The things we do when we think we're having fun. Okay. After that, in 1914, I'm sorry. Yeah, that was 14. The next year, sorry, no, that was 1912, 1913. Let's go on. Sorry, I haven't practiced this speech as many times as I would like to. Yeah. Another option, and we'll talk about the year that the class scrap was not held for good reasons. Another option was pushball. This became popular in other schools. Remember the class scrap, I don't know if I mentioned this, these were very common in the Midwest. Most colleges had them. University of Iowa, Iowa State, others had these. University of Iowa started experimenting with big pushball games and trying to do that as a cohesion building exercise for the two classes. And it worked fairly well because the University of Iowa president said, I'll expel you if you don't participate in this, and you participate in that. It was a very simple choice for them. Grinnell tried that one year. Obviously the freshmen ate, softs won. It didn't go that well because it didn't take that much team cohesion. It just took a lot of people pushing on the ball. But that was the only year that that was actually tried. Here's a great picture of everybody running towards the ball at the start. I can just see that's going to be quite a crash in a moment. Okay, so that's the background of the class scrap. I just wanted to go through some of the ideas of it, why they're holding and all of that, why there was opposition to it, and why some of the students at least were willing to pull back from it. In 1913, the two classes pretended they were, after President Maine had given a very impassioned chapel talk against the scrap, the two classes agreed not to hold a scrap, but they didn't tell anybody. So they went off and pretended to camp in their different areas, but in the middle of the night, they went out 2.5 miles west of town to a stonecutter's yard. It's actually a farmer who had a huge granite boulder on his property. They went out there, got a rock from this guy, put it onto a wagon, and then by hand dragged it the 2.5 miles back into town. And there we're in Central Campus, where all of the crowd was gathered waiting to see the big fight. These young men came up toting this wagon, singing school songs, plunked the rock down, and magically, each of the class presidents and President Maine and several professors all happened to have orations ready to give to the assembled masses, talking about peace in our time, how wonderful it's going to be. Now, this is pre-World War I and World War II, you know. Peace in our time, to them meant we're not going to have a stupid class scrap anymore. The rock was placed on Central Campus, as we can see here, and the plan was to smooth it off on one side and engrave the 2 years of the two graduating classes, 16 and 17. Yeah, and it was hailed, this event was hailed by the newspapers and others as being a great step forward in the progress of the Grinnell spirit and becoming the institution that we had the possibility of being. However, let's talk about the rock. I'm going to get to talking about a little bit more. Hang on here. I'm suddenly lost where I was. Let's talk about the rock. This is a picture of the rock up close. You can't see it too terribly well, but it's described. I'm sorry.
What is the estimated weight of that rock?
What is the estimated weight of that rock? I have no idea. This is the only photograph. I can't guess. I have a couple of rocks in my yard that weigh in the 1 to 2 ton range. I would guess it might be 4 or 5 tons, but without a good scale of reference next to it, I really just don't know how big it is. It's said to be very large. That's all I have. Sorry.
That'd be one big wagon and a whole lot of kids.
That'd be one big wagon. But you had the entire male sectors of the two classes. You probably had well over 50 people able to pull the wagon. And
You gotta pick it up and put it on the wagon.
there are some questions here that I haven't got answers for. And that by golly is one. I do not know how they did it.
Do you
Ma'am.
know what kind of a rock it is?
Yes, yes. We're going to talk about that. It's a granite rock, which, no, this is what we call a glacial erratic, okay? Here in Iowa, you're getting a little bit ahead of me, but I like that. I like that. Do all of you know what a glacial erratic is? A glacial erratic is a round, usually rounded mass of stone that is not native to where it's found because it was put there by a glacier, one or more glaciers. We'll go a little bit more into that. Iowa, if you're standing here in Grinnell, you have to go down 450 or so feet to get to rock. That's all glacial till. That's all stuff dumped here by different glaciers. When you get down there, it's limestone for 2,000 feet below that. The same thing in all over Iowa. Iowa is basically underlaid by limestone for hundreds, if not thousands of feet. So a chunk of granite has to have come down from Minnesota or even up in Canada. Now, glacial erratics tend to be rounded. This is not rounded. It's nice and chunky, which tells us it's not an erratic in its current form. It's broken off of one, just as the newspaper said. Let's talk about glaciation. I love that. If somebody hadn't asked that, I'd be standing up here going, God, am I really going to talk about glaciers? They don't want to talk about glaciers. Okay, talking about glaciers, these are different lobes of different glaciers. A lot of people think of the Ice Age as it got really cold, there was a lot of ice, and then it went away. Actually, there were different lobes of glaciers that pushed down and then melted back over a couple of million years, quite often with large periods between major glacial events. Down in southern Iowa, the southern Iowa drift plain, and we're up in that northern part, right under that little curly Q of the Iowan surface. This area was glaciated in the Illinoisan period, which is going back something like 300,000 years. I'm having trouble finding an exact date on it. I don't know if we even have an exact date. The most recent glacial period was the Des Moines lobe that you see in blue there, which came down and basically stopped at Des Moines. And if you go to the state capitol, you stand up on the Capitol building and look out over the city, you're up on a high ridge there, it's really pretty. Well, that's because that glacier, acting as a bulldozer, pushed that ridge up. You're standing where the glacier stopped, which I think is really cool. But down where we are, it's a lot older material, so the big rocks, the rocks we have here, didn't come down 14,000, 15,000 years ago with that blue group. They've been here for several 100,000 years. So it just gives you an interesting perspective on the rock we're talking about. There are other glacial erratics here in town that are used as monuments. This is one from the class of 1880 on campus, and you have seen it. This is a very big rock too. And if you look at it, it has a striation on the face where it was rubbed across the ground by the ice so many hundreds of thousands of years ago. Another nice rock is the class of 1980, which they were allowed to put, even though the college has a no rocks on campus policy now, they were allowed to put it because it matched the class of 1880.
That's Dan Weeks' class. That's Dan
Yeah.
Weeks' class.
And Larry Pinder, and it would have been mine if I hadn't gone to technical school there for a year. But yes, 1980. So, the question was, did you know it was Dan Weeks' class? Who you wanted to have here instead of me today. Here is a rock. This weighs about 500 pounds. It's another glacial erratic. You can tell I like rocks. Hope you don't mind. This is another glacial erratic in the yard of a very prominent family here in town, Karen and mine. And you can see that it has striations going in several different directions, which means it got tumbled back and forth by either several glaciers over many different ages, or it somehow got turned and tumbled as it went over thick ground. So that's enough for glacial erratics. I'm going to stop there. We're going to come back and talk about why this big white granite rock is so odd, and give you a little bit more idea of its family. And I'll let you go to the break, and I'll let you figure out what that guy's talking about by the rock and its family. Have a good break.
Thank you for taking your chairs again. I have a question for Byron. When did those young men ever get their studying done? Well, that can't be the Grinnell College I attended.
I don't think it's the Grinnell College I attended quite in the same way. But don't forget, this was just anywhere from a day to a couple of days of tussling. I mean,
Okay.
it wasn't the entire year.
Just so they got their studying done.
As far as I know, it wasn't the entire year.
And we'll go on with more stories. Byron Hueftle-Worley.
Thank you. Okay, now it gets weird. There's a question in the back, please.
My question is, and I'm surprised nobody asked, on the first picture you showed of the rock, they were what looked like Chinese writing.
That is correct. Don't worry.
What's that all about?
Just don't worry about it. Why is there Chinese writing on the picture of the rock? Just pay no. We'll get to that in a minute, okay? You guys are way ahead of me. I don't even know why I'm giving you this lecture. You already know it. Okay, we're going to keep talking about glacial rocks. There is a reason for that. Trust me, there is a madness to my method. Okay. Anybody, show of hands, who knows what this is? I know you all know what it is. It's the shelter house at Merrill Park. I'm just seeing if you're actually paying attention. In it, you'll notice that there is a stone fireplace made out of glacial erratics. And I want you to pay a little bit of attention to them. Notice they're all nice and round. Most of them have a very small crystal structure. That's because they cooled at a fairly high rate. High rate for magma not necessarily being what you and I would consider, say, dinner cooling down. The faster magma cools underground as it forms granite, the finer the crystals are, because crystals don't have a lot of time to grow big. At least that's what I've been told. I'm not personally an expert on this. But as you can see, most of these are fairly reddish. They move up into the tans, and they're fairly small crystalline structure. If we move over to the Merrill Park sign, which I also like, this is a sign that was built in the 1930s. It was built during the Depression to commemorate the fact that Colonel Merrill had donated all of that land to the city for the park. He was the farmer who owned that chunk of town. So if you live out north of Merrill Park, you're basically living in a cow pasture. You were. This was built during the Depression from donated materials. There was an article put in the newspaper begging people to bring in rocks from your yard so that they could build this sign. So these are rocks from all around town. These are native rocks. It was built by a couple of masons who were out of work, this being the Depression, and the city paid them to build this sign, which was originally supposed to be about 5 times that big, but the city ran out of money, that being the Depression. It was built by a couple of masons. So let's take a look at the rocks on it. We get the same pattern, the same local types, fairly small grain. This one happens to be broken fit on a corner, but they're rounded and they're small grains, not very white, not a lot of showy quartz crystal. Now if we also look, let's take a quick diversion here because that's what I do best. Let's take a look at the sign. It says Merrill Park. That was made by putting tiles on a flat surface on a tarp. Put the little tiles down, so that it's face down, pour concrete on top, and then put some kind of reinforcing mesh on top, let the whole thing harden, then you can stand it up and mortar it into place. And if you look at it up close, you can actually see the crease lines from the tarp. Now that's kind of fun, but why am I showing you that? Well, I want you to look at the tiles. Notice they're hexagonal, reddish, what we would call a quarry tile today. They're very distinctive. Where have you ever seen them before? If you go to the Art Center, which used to be the Stewart Library, and you look at the floor, that gorgeous hand-laid floor where all the lines are within a ½ inch of straight from wall to wall on the 3 different axes for that hexagonal pattern, you look up close, you find the same tiles. Because George Coutts, the mason who built what's now the Art Center, he had died, and his business had gone somewhat fallow during the Depression. And these tiles were obviously donated for the purpose of making the Merrill Park sign. So you didn't think I could tie that sign and that building. Okay. Why didn't any of you notice that there was Chinese writing? I'm sorry. Most of you did. Why is there Chinese writing on this? We're going to get to that in a second. But let's talk about what happened to the rock. Remember, this rock was broken off of a big chunk 2.5 miles west of town, brought in apparently by hand. How they got it, the vehicle, I have no idea. but it got there. We have a picture of it. But the problem is, not everybody bought into the piece rock idea, the end of the class scrap. In fact, the two upper classes really didn't like their valued tradition being stepped on. So what they did was, one night, they painted that rock red. That was early April of 1914. They painted it bright red and wrote the numbers 18 on it, which may give us a clue of which class it was that didn't like the death of the class scrap. Okay? Now that seems pretty tacky. On April 23rd of 1914, the entire north end of town was woken up by a violent explosion. A very loud bang, windows rattled throughout the entire north end of town because somebody had dug a hole under the piece rock, planted dynamite under it, which you could buy in a hardware store at that time, and they blew it up. And the description in the paper says, a chunk was knocked off the east end and shards were sent flying, but they didn't tap it well enough. They didn't get enough dirt around to cover the explosion. So the explosive force just kind of rumbled the rock and blew a piece off, but didn't destroy it. Lucky rock. April 24th, just a day later, vandals went out in the middle of the night, dug a hole next to the rock, tipped it in, and buried it over. This is reported in the paper. And it's buried, and the newspapers declared it dead and buried, and it's gone. Now, we get back to the question, how did they get it in the wagon? How do we know they put it in the hole and didn't take it away and just dig a hole to pretend? I'm guessing this one we actually know they dug a hole next to it, dumped it in. So that means this rock must be sitting there on Central Campus, because who would be silly enough to go back and dig it up and take it away? Nobody. Okay, back to the rock. Oh, I'm not ready to talk about the Chinese characters yet. Dang it, I'll get there. Trust me, I will. Let's take a look at what we're talking about. Here's the rock. We've got what was at that time the men's gymnasium, what was later the women's gymnasium, and now is no gymnasium, it's just a field on campus. Let's see if we can locate where that is. Here's a map of the college at about that time. Now the newspaper stated that the rock was placed right at the conjunction of the three sidewalks on Central Campus. If we look at the picture, we have the gymnasium, and we have three sidewalks that converge there. So that's a pretty good bet of what the location would have to be. Here's a little bit later picture. This has one of the buildings. It's now got the science building, it's got ARHs now there, and the heating plant is that kind of rectangular thing up there directly across. And we'll come back to the importance of the heating plant in a minute. So we're getting a pretty good idea of where this location must be. X marks the spot. Now the sidewalks have changed a little bit, but unlike our sidewalks in front of our houses or in front of the library here, the sidewalks on Central Campus are heating tunnels. They go down 8 or 9 feet. They have big steam pipes running through them. They sometimes have other utilities. I don't know what all is down there. Some of those have been torn out, but most of them are still in their original locations. So for instance, this is the new sidewalk that goes between Carnegie Library and the chapel. So we're walking due east. Over there, that white area is the graduation platform with the, I call it the amphitheater, but so be it. And then we have the science building. The sidewalk back there in the back that angles back towards the library is that original diagonal heating tunnel. The heating tunnel that came out this way is long gone because it was no longer needed. And of course, the heating tunnel that went out to the gym is no longer there because there's no longer a gym there. So if we walk out here and find that location, we have our diagonal sidewalk that comes up here, used to go up to the gym, And then there used to be a heating tunnel that came through here to go to Carnegie. So right there is the conjunction of those three sidewalks. And I went out and I probed, I got permission from the college, I went out and I probed with a T-handled bar, and probed and probed and probed, and I could track the foundation of that heating tunnel quite a ways because I only broke it off that far down. When I take the whole heating tunnel out, I couldn't find the rock anywhere until I realized that's the original sidewalk. What's under there? And I'm not going to show you a picture of it. That's for later, not today. There, with the graduation platform right behind you, that is the exact position of that rock. And if you dig down anywhere in this area, about this far, you hit the top of the rock. It's almost completely under the sidewalk. Now, I think that is really fun. When it was buried, this is from, as you can read, Class Rock going down. You can't read the sign very well. It says Class Scrap, departed April 25th for Grinnell in China. It's a joke. It went through the earth and it went to China. Isn't that cute? It's just like a Bugs Bunny cartoon or something like that. But what is Grinnell in China? We're going to have to get to that in a moment. But notice this fellow, and the woman is pretending to cry, I think. He has what we in the Army called a something-eating grin. And he's sitting on the dirt. And I want you to pay attention to three things in the background. We have the chimney of the heating plant. That came down somewhere in the 60s, as I recall. Yeah. So we're looking almost due east from that intersection I just showed you. We ought to be able to go there and see this same view. And if we do, what do we see with here? What's that? That's a sapling. It's probably a 20-foot sapling there. That's huge. And there's another one back there that's probably 12 feet. Those are big. But if we go there today, that's what they look like. Those are the two trees you just saw in the previous picture. And to give you some idea of what 102 years has done here, this is a friendly passerby. I have no idea who she was, but she didn't think I was creepy, so she let me take her picture. This is her, a woman standing in front of one of those sycamores. That's looking up into it. It's monstrous. So, we're back to the picture. I just love the difference in old photographs and modern ones where you can see something. It's fun to look at Faneuil Hall in Boston. Boston, yeah. I'm not very good with the East Coast, and I don't go to the West. Don't ask me any questions, please. But, you know, you look at a picture of an old building, and you look at a modern picture of the same old building, and if they look alike, you say, oh, nothing's changed. But you look at trees and living beings and landscapes, and you can see such a change in just a short period of time. I love the look of those. Now we're finally going to talk about the Chinese. I said I would, I just forgot where I was in my little talk here. It is written in Chinese. Well, here, I'll give you a better view of it. Go ahead and read that. It went all the way through the center of the earth, and it's in China. But who are the students of Porter's Academy, and what is Grinnell in China? We have Grinnell in London. I mean, some of you have actually been on some of these programs. A lot of students have gone on. That's where you go, and students are learning in the environment of London or wherever your Grinnell in X program is. So is this something like that? No, it's not. Remember, Grinnell College was a Congregationalist church, very strongly tied to the Congregationalist church. You remember the daily chapel thing? It was a very strongly religious school that had ties all over the country and in different parts of the world. In 1913, the Grinnell Congregational Church, Grinnell College, and several local donors put together a program to build an academy in China, in Shantung province. The idea was not that we were going to take our students there and have them experience China. The idea was graduates from Grinnell would go there and do the socially active thing of not only carrying the Word of God to them, but teaching them. It was designed to be a pilot program to build modern schools in an area that had never had modern schools. Grinnell College and the Grinnell Congregational Church were going to be the founders of that, and they planned to reach over 3 million people. Now Grinnell, the city of Grinnell and the Grinnell College have a long period, even before that, of working in China, both in relief efforts and in working with the missionary, sending missionaries. If you've read about the Boxer Rebellion, I'm not going to go into it, but there was a rebellion in China, 1899 to 1901, where two factions, basically one pro-Western and the other anti-Western, had a rebellion, and 8 different countries, including the United States, sent in troops to quash it. One of the key points of contention was that American missionaries and some European missionaries were coming to China and making inroads on the traditional Chinese way of life, and a lot of people didn't like that. But Grinnell had been sending, Grinnell as a college and as a community had sent a number of missionaries to China before that and for many years after. Some of them served there for 30 and 40 years. So Grinnell as a city, as a community, as a church, and as a college had a long and deep history of Grinnell in China. So thank you for the rock. It makes a noble adornment. Actually touches on a very large social activism that was going on in this community at the time. You didn't think I'd get that from a rock. This is a bit of a briefing on Grinnell and China. I'm not going to go into detail. This is right out of the yearbook, 1917, I believe. This is pictures from Shantung of people who are being helped by the Grinnell in China program. I mean, the college students were putting it in their yearbooks and basically saying, oh, we want to go do this. It was absolutely a fantastic program, but it fizzled out during the Depression. We're back to the Depression. Here is one of the exchange students who came here. I don't think he's an exchange student. He was actually brought here from Shantung province and was a full student. He did graduate from Grinnell College. I think because he's the one who his dates match up with the writing by the rock, I think this young man is actually the person who did the calligraphy for the rock picture. Okay, we're getting down to the end here. Remember, this is a question.
That fellow that was sitting with the grin on his face, was he sitting on top of a rock?
Back on the picture of the buried rock was the fellow sitting on the rock. He's sitting right above the rock, as far as I can tell. But the rock isn't actually, no, it's just a pile of dirt. No, the rock is actually down far enough that he wasn't actually sitting on it. It'd be nice to have another picture of the rock, but I don't. Now let's talk about the rock, okay? That's all we talked about for an hour and a half. Back to the rock. It's broken off of a much bigger piece. So I know, since you're asking about the Chinese, you're asking all these other good questions. I know every one of you immediately thought, does it have any brothers and sisters? And if it does, how do we know the difference between a male rock and a female? Does the rock have any... This is why we're talking about the different types of granite. This is a fairly light, large crystal granite. It's very unusual for this area. So can we find any other pieces of it anywhere in town? Well, if you go over to Jim White's store, it used to be Bates Flowers. It's right by St. Mary's Education Center, right on Broad Street. There is a rock, by golly. So you get up close to it. It was dedicated by the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution, in 1914, and it marks about the site of the first house built in Grinnell called the Long Elm. And it's stated right there in the newspaper, when they're talking about the DAR having placed this rock, that it was broken from a large gray boulder 2.5 miles west of town. And if you look at it carefully, look at it up close, by golly, it's a large crystal white granite, and if you look at it just from a little bit farther back, it's got no rounding. It's not just an edge piece of a kind of big boulder, it's somewhere from the middle, just like the rock we saw on Central Campus. So, that's either a brother or sister. I didn't ask. If we go to Central Park, there's another rock. This one dedicated to J.D. Grinnell, and it stands across from his household. Of course, it wasn't actually his household, it was all his wife's money that bought all the land in town, so it was really her household, but we didn't do it that way then. So anyway, back to this rock. If we get up close to it, it's got a nice plaque, and it's a large structure, a large crystal, whitish granite. And interestingly, I'll read it here, if I brought it. Yeah. It was broken off of a piece of a larger boulder some 2.5 miles west of Grinnell. So that is either another brother or sister. I'm getting down to the end here, so you don't have to hold up the clock yet. But I just wanted to say, do you know the secret of this rock? See, this is what this whole lecture, this whole talk is about, is what I'm now going to say. All the rest of this has been smokescreen and mirrors. Here's the cool thing. What's behind the plaque? According to the Grinnell Herald of May 4th, 1916, the bronze box, which is enclosed within the boulder, contains the following articles. A book, the semi-centennial of the founding of Grinnell, containing pictures of the 4 original pioneers, J.D. Grinnell, Dr. Thomas Holyoke, Homer Hamlin, and Henry M. Hamilton. A booklet commemorating the silver wedding anniversary of Mr. and Mrs. J.D. Grinnell, a photograph of Mrs. Grinnell, a picture of the J.D. Grinnell homestead, and a yearbook of the DAR for the current year, plus the latest copies of Grinnell Herald and the Grinnell Register. So what I really wanted to do is tell you that there is a secret chamber with a bronze box behind this, but I had to read the disclaimer. There's no great treasure, so there's no reason to pry it open and see what's in it. I just told you what's there. You really don't want it because we have it over at the museum anyway. Okay, there is one other big rock. Let's talk about it. This is over where Ward Field used to be. This is by the athletic center. The North Campus is up here. You can see that. When I was younger, there was a drive that came up and went around this. There was a gym there. There was a football stadium there. There were a whole bunch of things there. Now it's just kind of a field, but the rock is still there, and the same tree, except the tree is somehow different. I don't know how. Okay, as we get up close to it, we can see this is also probably a glacial erratic, and it has no smooth surface, but it doesn't look as fractured, and it's a really well-carved thing in the middle. It's not quite as crude as that J.D. Grinnell's monument. And when we get up close, we find out it's a whitish granite, but it's really a quite fine-grained structure. So this is not a brother and sister. It may be a very distant cousin. It may be a glacial erratic from somewhere in central Iowa that came from somewhere around the same area, but it's not a brother or sister to the 3 big rocks that we know from the same rock, one of which is buried on Central Campus. Since it's buried on Central Campus, I keep coming back to that. This is my plea to you. John Whitaker and Kathy Camp, the Camp Whitakers, they are anthropology professors at Grinnell College. They teach a field studies, a field methods course. They're planning on teaching that next spring. They are considering using this rock, since they know where it is, and since Central Campus is going to be chewed up for construction over the next few years, they are considering getting permission from the college authorities to excavate this rock so that we can actually see it for the first time, other than the little bit that I've seen, since it was buried back in 1914. So I'm going to ask you, if you know John or Kathy, please say, yes, please dig up the rock. Byron needs to see it. And if you have any pull with the college administration, please go to them and, in the immortal words of President Ronald Reagan, how did he say that? Mr. President, dig up this rock! So, that's our rock. I'd like to see it someday, but I can't. Oh, that's supposed to be turned the other way because that's a cat that's mimicking the picture on the clock above him. Anyway, that was supposed to be my question slide because I've run out of things to say. And I certainly hope you have some interesting questions because I'm dead up here.
Why did they never make an effort to dig the rock?
Why did they never make an effort to dig up the rock? I have no idea. It seemed like a really neat thing if I had been the college president or somebody important, and we had a symbol of, okay, friendship and amity between classes. I think I would have, to teach them a lesson, I would have dug it up and brought it back up. I don't have an answer for that. That's part of the reason I want to dig it up is to see if it's painted red and make sure it is actually the correct rock. But I don't know why they didn't dig it up. Please.
Have you tried to find any other parts 2.5 miles west that might still be there?
Have I tried to find any other parts anywhere else? No, I haven't. I know that this area is 2.5 miles west, but it's such a large area, it would have been a glacial erratic. It's not like it came out of a quarry where you can go and look at a quarry and see, oh, well, maybe this is the right strata or something like that. It's from Minnesota or probably even up in Canada. I have no way of finding it, and I'm assuming in 100 years they pretty well cleared off the field that it was in. But no, I haven't been able to do, I have not been able to find any other pieces. I've got 3 and that's it. George.
Byron, this is just a comment that there were some lingering aspects of the class scrap even when I was a first-year student or a freshman at Grinnell, which is the year 1952.
Really?
I was in North Yonker Hall, and Yonker Hall then was divided between North and South. The men in those days stayed in the hall all 4 years. You had hall pins. You went through hazing and so on, got paddled every Monday night, etc. But at the conclusion of Hell Week, which was after 8 weeks, we had a Hell Week. Then the North and South Yonker preps would go down to Central Park and fight the Civil War. We'd have a big fight, a scrap in Central Park. All of us survived, so far as I know.
And then you didn't use any bromine or any of those things. Did everybody hear George's wonderful statement there? I couldn't possibly repeat it to you, but there are apparently some remnants of the scrap lasting up into the 50s. Wonderful. Any other questions, folks?
I got to state.
Yes, ma'am.
I used to work in the old building where, in the heating
The heating
plant.
plant.
And the fellow that took care of underground tunnels said all the phone connections were running through that. Not only heating, but that too.
That's amazing. Yeah, she said she worked in the heating plant back when it was still there, and the fellow who took care of the tunnels had all the phone lines run through the tunnels as well, which is fascinating because that would explain why there aren't phone poles and wires all over campus. I'd never thought of that. Thank you. I'd never thought about why there weren't. Well, thank you. Thank you.
He was very mad at people that mistreated his phone connections. Oh,
He was mad at people, would get mad at people who mistreated the phone lines, and I'm sure he was not alone. The phone company tends to have problems with that too, I'm told.
well, they had one time when we were on campus that they cut the lines. And we were getting north and south and women and men all mixed up. It was a mess.
Messing with the phone lines can't absolutely mess up a campus like that. Absolutely. In the back, sir.
There is a story that was around. The gentleman's name was Stu Rader. He was ahead of me and when I matriculated at Grinnell College. And he used the steam tunnel to make his way to the women's dorm and was able to break into Luce Hall through the steam tunnel.
Oh my. I'm guessing the authorities would have taken a dim view of him moving through the steam tunnels for any reason.
Well,
getting into the women's dorm would be the worst.
Actually, all the women on South Campus cheered him, and that's it.
It's just
Are there any more questions?
Just a comment, I remember that the tunnels usually melted off during the winter time, and so they didn't have to slick and salt all of those things, but they were quite easy to walk on that trip.
I remember the tunnels as you did, the sidewalks melting off from the heat, the steam heat, sure. It serves dual purpose. Wonderful.
I remember Stu Roeder very well. He was a very, very active and very much of a fun guy on campus.
Okay. I want to thank you folks for being such a wonderful audience. I really appreciate getting a chance to come here and talk, and I really enjoyed getting some applause.
Well, Byron, we thank you for this wonderful talk today. Byron knows so much about the treasures of Grinnell, of which he is one. We thank you so much for sharing your information and your great stories with us, Byron. Thank you. And we hope to see you all again next week. There are some extra copies of the Iowan magazine out there. If you see one that you didn't pick up last week, feel free to pick one up this week. And in the meantime, have a good beginning of October, and we'll see you next week.